Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Tuesday, the 19th of August, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Robert, good morning. Let's jump inside the Beltway, starting with a handful of these states are sending more National Guard troops to D.C. What's the latest?
Good morning, Mike. That's correct. Now we're seeing National Guard deployments from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. And so Tennessee said they did not say how many troops they were going to send, but Louisiana did say they are sending 135 National Guard members, and Mississippi is sending 200. So that brings the total to at least around 1,100 National Guard troops deployed in D.C.
Mm-hmm. Let's just briefly. There's been some speculation, some conspiratorial thinking surrounding this. I've seen a social media freak out. People are saying, why is Trump sending all these National Guard troops to D.C.? What's going on? Are they moving troops through the tunnels in D.C.? Is that why they took over the Smithsonian? And it's like listening to them, you would think that Trump is planning some massive, militarized takeover of D.C. Probably not the case. However, we've seen a lot of videos and also photos of National Guard troops not in high crime areas, but seemingly they look to be guarding landmarks in and around D.C. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think there's two things. One, it is a presence thing. And there's also a mission constraints, I think, where they're deploying these National Guard troops specifically to protect federal facilities as part of their mission. So they have to be around these areas as part of the Title 32 deployments. I think it's also they're doing that to free up the DC Metro Police to go into the high crime areas, because as you pointed out yesterday, they have at least an 800 police shortage in their department, which is something that is not just in DC. There's also shortages around the U.S. due to a multi-year recruitment crisis.
Mm-hmm. So the official story is Trump wants to clean up crime in DC. Fair point taken. Do you think there's anything to the claims that the National Guard is there for any other reasons? Just looking at the calendar, we've got this big Labor Day protest coming up here at the end of the month. Other than that, I have not seen any protests or demonstrations for DC that would require the National Guard. So either there's nothing there or I'm missing something, but last word.
No, I don't see anything either. I have yet to see any leaks or anything to do with any type of ulterior motive for this National Guard deployment.
Mm-hmm. All right. Fair enough. Thanks for that. All right, let's go ahead and move on. There's another, speaking of social media freakouts, President Trump said he wants to end mail-in ballot voting and also wants to look at these voting machines. Paper ballots, voter ID seems to be a pretty surefire way to ensure free and fair elections. Of course, everyone's going to have some sort of issue with that. However, what's the latest, Robert?
Yesterday, President Trump said he would sign an executive order ahead of next year's election, and that order would target mail-in ballots and electronic voting machines. But he didn't provide any details about exactly what an executive order would do as far as targeting those mail-in ballots and machines, or a time frame for issuing the order. I think there would be some problems with an executive order over elections, because the states control the actual process of elections. But I think this could be a signal that Trump will put pressure on states to rein in the use of mail-in ballots and try to have more secure elections.
Mm-hmm. All right. Looking at the courts, has there been any major movement by the Supreme Court or by any of these states to substantially reduce voting by mail-in ballot? Because I know a number of these red states have looked at it, and between cleaning voter rolls, it's always a messy, legalistic process, but also introducing new regulations, just looking ahead to 2028. And we know that one party is substantially benefited by mail-in ballots. It does seem to me like if these Republican state houses do take aim at mail-in balloting, or at the state level, at the state house, if they can push this stuff through by 2028, that could fundamentally alter an election potentially.
Well, there have been some fights still ongoing over this in a couple of swing states like Pennsylvania, where Republicans are trying to implement some kind of security procedures, like identification procedures requiring the use of like social security numbers printed on or written on the envelopes of some of these mail-in ballots. And there have been some other moves. I think if a couple of weeks ago, a federal court in Florida blocked a law that DeSantis signed saying basically non-citizens cannot work for get out the vote and voter registration nonprofits. So there have been some back and forth, but I think this fight between Republicans and Democrats, especially in the swing states, are still ongoing, and nothing has reached the Supreme Court yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that update. Please continue.
So yesterday, the House Oversight Chair, James Comer, Kentucky Republican, said that the DOJ is going to start handing over all files related to the Jeffrey Epstein case beginning this week. He didn't say when Congress is going to make these files public. And according to a person that is familiar with the House Oversight investigation, they said that the committee began private depositions yesterday with key individuals involved in this case. And the first, I believe, was actually former Attorney General Bill Barr, who was deposed yesterday.
Mm-hmm. All right. So basically, we're going to see some redacted versions, maybe. You know, it's funny. They said, we're going to start releasing these files. Okay. If their concern is protecting innocent people and people who have not been formally charged, but maybe there's some claims of wrongdoing in these files. I don't know. It seems to me like we're going to get a big pile of redacted pieces of paper, Robert.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also the problem that Republicans in Congress are going to run into if they get all of these documents and there really isn't anything there that hasn't already been released or leaked. That's going to be an issue because I think Democrats are going to say that they're not releasing all the documents. And that's a problem politically, I think, for the Trump administration if there really isn't anything there.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on now. Just to set this up, this is very important. DA cooperation with Mexico, because under the previous president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the Mexican president, former, he was very sensitive about DEA operations, and he went so far as disbanding Mexico's top joint drug task force between Mexican law enforcement and the Drug Enforcement Administration. And now they are cooperating again under Sheinbaum. A positive development, but what's the latest?
So this is a new initiative from the DEA. They say that the idea of this is to strengthen U.S.-Mexico collaboration against the cartels. They're calling it Project Portero, and the DEA says they're going to target what they're calling cartel gatekeepers who control the smuggling corridors along the U.S.-Mexico border. And they said this is also going to include the Homeland Security Task Force. And the idea behind this is they're calling it a whole of government effort. So it's not just law enforcement, but also intelligence resources and even prosecutorial resources against these cartel networks. I think the first step they're doing is effectively a training operation on U.S. soil with Mexican law enforcement officials. And the idea is to collaborate on intelligence gathering and creating targeting packets for these cartels.
Okay. That's fantastic news. Robert, do you remember? I think this was in October, maybe September, October last year. There was a new DOD directive, and it was something to the effect of use of defense intelligence assets to support law enforcement. And I forget the number it was. We can pull it up. I wrote a 2 or 3 page report on exactly what this said. One of the things it said is it appears to allow, at the discretion of the Secretary of Defense, it appears to allow DOD's use of Title 50 units or Title 50 funding, which is covert and clandestine activities on U.S. soil. And that is something that was expressly authorized in this DOD directive. Are we going to see Tier 1 units, special operations or intelligence or any kind of Title 50 operations working with Mexican authorities to go after cartels on the border? Because that's exactly what this DOD directive was pointed towards. One of the things.
I think that's what we're headed toward. The Trump administration is one, the FTO, a foreign terrorist organization designation, and two, that alleged secret directive to the DoD to authorize military force against the cartels. I think that's where the Trump administration is headed because they appear to be serious about addressing the cartel threat. And a big part of that is this spread of the cartels throughout the United States over the last roughly 10 years, but especially the last 4 years. So I would not be surprised to see in the next, I would say 18 months, some type of ramp up of domestic use of those Title 50 forces to go after a cartel presence here in the U.S. and on the other side of the border with the cooperation of the Mexican government.
Mhm. Yeah, and then I would just add too, this is not just a national security issue for organized crime, but we're talking about cartels that could maybe already, but could become in the future, become proxy groups for, say, China or maybe some other country for use in the United States potentially. And so I think that's kind of a big deal. So thanks for staying on top of that, Robert. All right, and then finally, yesterday there was a question about this Israeli guy. So he's an Israeli cyber. He's the executive director of the Israeli Cyber Directorate. Is that a private entity or is that part of the Israeli government?
As far as I understand, he is a government official. And this was an update from the State Department yesterday. I guess they were getting a lot of questions about this situation. They clarified that he is not claimed diplomatic immunity, has not been given any kind of favorable treatment by the Trump administration. And he's actually been given a court date. It is supposed to report to court for charges related to soliciting sex electronically from a minor.
All right. So he doesn't have diplomatic immunity. He was spirited away back to Israel. He has a court date. If this guy just doesn't show up, he goes scot-free as long as he doesn't come back to the United States.
Well, potentially. I don't know how real. I don't think this is a realistic outcome, but potentially the FBI could go after him once a warrant is issued. I mean, the FBI conducts overseas arrests pretty regularly. I just in this case, a foreign government official, I'm not sure if they would actually do that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to today's Global Sit Rep. Jared, good morning.
Morning.
Let's start with the days of our lives continuing on here with China and India. What's the latest?
Yeah. So Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he's over in India right now conducting a 2-day meeting with his Indian counterpart, the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. Now, sources close to those talks told Indian media that China will address India's needs in rare earth minerals, fertilizers, and tunnel boring machines. They were very hung up on that. Now, the two are also discussing, this is per Jaishankar himself, also discussing river data sharing, which is a burgeoning issue over on the northern border of India, border trade, connectivity, and bilateral exchanges. Now, this is all pointing toward much cozier relations between the two. They claim to have settled the border issue. They're at least not going to push it, even though both of them claim additional territory.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on here because you have, what was he, the former U.S. Trade Representative, Peter Navarro, whatever he is now, a senior counselor for trade and manufacturing. All right, he wrote this piece over at the Wall Street Journal, basically saying the United States needs to go hard against India. And we're talking about these tariffs, and there's been some back and forth about India buying Russian oil. And the Trump administration says, you're funding the Russian war machine with your oil purchases. And India says, well, we got 1 billion people and we need oil, and we're going to buy it from Russia anyway. And that's pretty much where we are. So what's the latest?
Yeah, Navarro actually went as far as to say, hey, none of that is even true because Russia made up 1% of your daily imports prior to 2022. And then when it got cheap, you jumped it up to 30% of your daily imports. So your population did not boom by 30%. You're just taking advantage of this at our expense. He also said that arms sales to India consistently have strings attached by the Indians. So all weapons that we send to them had to be manufactured over there, and that risks, leaking cutting edge technology from American manufacturers over in India to China and Russia, because Russia still makes up 36% of India's arms imports. They're There's a not to mention their premier anti-ship missile, the BrahMos, was actually a joint Russian-Indian venture. There's still a ton of trade there. But
Interesting.
yeah, Navarre is
so we could potentially see in an armed conflict Chinese ships being sunk by joint Russian-Indian BrahMos anti-ship missiles. Interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
From Vietnam and the Philippines. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Continue with Navarro.
Yep. So Navarre was very explicit. Hey, the stated goal is to get India to reduce its imports of Russian oil and weapons, not to cut off the relationship. Just get them to start acting like the ally they claim to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was my next question. What does this actually do to the U.S.-India relationship? Because there's been a lot of talk, maybe more smoke than fire, but there's been speculation, at least, that India could become an actor in this World War III scenario against China. It seems like this makes them less willing to go along with that idea.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think India is going to flip sides, but I think they will probably move much more towards the neutral stance of, hey, we're definitely not getting involved. That's your issue over there. And we've covered the force, basically the entire force development over in the Pacific. And I'm not sure that the United States necessarily needs them anymore. Because back in 2016, when the Quad was, I think it was 2016, might have been 2018, when the Quad was restarted, India was largely pulled along because they were a threat to China's other threat axis. Like, you could have them step in, and at least as long as they're always providing a potential threat, China cannot fully remove forces from that border. It makes it harder. So, I think China, or I think India is going to go back to a neutral stance, but I'm not sure that matters so much anymore, considering all of the developments we've seen in the Pacific proper.
Okay. Last point. A couple of years ago, the United States and India did sign that strategic defense cooperation agreement. We were going to jointly manufacture certain weapons, and which is great because the more stuff we can make over there, it's already in theater or close. We don't have to ship it all the way from the United States. And we also get a coalition partner involved. Is what happens to that defense cooperation agreement?
I think a lot of that stuff is on the chopping block, if I'm being quite frank. All of that defense manufacturing, probably the shipyards that we're preparing to open up. But I mean, given the quality of Indian work, I'm not sure that would have been great anyhow. That said, yeah, it's probably losing. We're probably losing a partner here. I think India is going to go, well, I think India, due to the fact that they're India first above everything, they will shift away. They're not, I don't think they're going to give up their partner in Russia. Just, they have such a long history with them. I don't see a point in it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sure. Right. Okay. Well, that's interesting. And we'll see what happens. All right, let's move on to the blue wave here. There's been a lot of speculation. We have major elections coming up in South America next year. Brazil, Colombia, a handful of others. I think Chile's in there as well. There's been some speculation that maybe the right-wing candidates will outperform, and that seems to be the case in Bolivia.
Yeah, Bolivia had their first round of elections this weekend for their president. And just for some context, Bolivia's had an openly socialist president since 2005, so yes, 20 solid years of it.
Yeah.
No candidate achieved a majority in this, so they will have a runoff in October to finalize everything. However, Rodrigo Paz Pereira of the center-right Christian Democratic Party was the top performer. He earned over 30% of the vote. And in the opinion polls, he was never above 10%. I think the closest he had 9 and some change. So he tripled his best performance. I think that points toward them probably electing him because he's far outperforming.
Yeah, potentially. You know, one thing that's going on in Chile is the left-wing parties are having a primary, and basically they've all agreed, communist, socialist, center-left, moderate left, whatever they are. They basically said, whoever wins this left-wing primary, everyone's going all in. We're going all in. And I don't know. I would have to look at the candidate list here, but the other argument here is that in Bolivia, last thing and we'll move on, but the argument is that all these lefties in Bolivia are just going to vote for a single candidate here in the runoff, and we'll see. All right, let's move on here to this update for Army AI?
Yeah. So the voice crack. The Army awarded Metron Inc. a $48.6 million contract yesterday for what they said is research, development, test, and evaluation of artificial intelligence and machine learning enabled technologies for expeditionary maneuver and air ground reconnaissance. So that's breaking the line, getting the first guys that are out there much more awareness of what they're about to step into so they can establish a proper line to actually get the rest of the force in. Now, the Army expects this work to be completed by a very specific date, 17 June 2029. So they do have a deadline for this. And it's just one more step into much more integration for AI into the larger forces.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then finally here, about 500 Taiwanese troops took part in this northern strike. Jared, I look at this image up here, and that's Michigan, and I'm seeing a lot of coastline. I'm guessing this was coastal defense or something to that effect. Basically, the Army is training Taiwanese soldiers on coastal defense, it looks like.
They weren't super clear about that. It kind of sounds like island hopping and island defense, actually, because it was about having a distributed force, small boat operations, and it was a total force participation. So every single branch of the U.S. military and the National Guard and Taiwan's troops. And this was also the first time that this exercise has shifted from a Europe-focused training to an Indo-Pacific focused training. This was not the first time that Taiwan had participated. They've been quietly sending troops since 21, but now it's just saying, yes, we are preparing you for a conflict over your island. And here we're doing, distributed operations around basically maritime operations using land forces. We're just openly training the Taiwanese.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, Jared, thanks for that. Let's go ahead and move on. We have 64 protests within the baseline. By the way, I don't think these protests are increasing like week over week, month over month, although they have obviously since the very beginning of the year. But currently, I don't see that. All right, let's go ahead and move on here to the latest in the gerrymander watch. Remember, just as a reminder, I think this is the most important thing going on in the country right now is the fate of Texas Democrats, as their seats are probably going to get erased here pretty soon. What's the latest?
So some Texas Democrats are returning to Texas this week. Starting yesterday, they began rolling into the Capitol in Austin, including the head of the Texas Democratic Caucus, Gene Wu from Houston, who also said they're going to pivot to challenging this new Texas mid-decade map in the courts. And then Texas House Speaker Dustin Burrows said yesterday that Democrats who do return would be subject to around-the-clock escort by Department of Public Safety personnel or lockdown in the Capitol. And I believe there's at least one Texas state Democrat who refused to have that around-the-clock escort and is basically locked in the Capitol building for the next 24 hours until they come back into session tomorrow. Looking at this new map, though, and listening to what some of the Democrats are talking about, it's not just going to flip at least 5 Dem congressional districts. It's also, I think, going to force some of these Democrats to fight pretty nasty primaries that are going to take resources away from other districts. And one of those is the 35th district, which is Lloyd Doggett and Greg Casar, who are now look like they're preparing to fight over that district tooth and nail to see who comes out on top.
Mm-hmm. I sure would like to see Greg Casar go home from Congress. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the California update.
Yeah, so California Assembly member Carl DeMaio, a Republican, said the California Republicans are going to file lawsuits as soon as this week to stop that November special election to approve their California's own congressional map. I believe they are starting hearings today or to get these bills moving forward in the California State Assembly to actually hold that special election and get a new map approved before Friday.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And let's move on here to next item, Jared, which is New Mexico. Speaking of National Guard deployments, they're combating crime in New Mexico, rather.
Yeah, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, a Democrat, declared a state of emergency in Rio Arriba County in the city of Espanola, New Mexico. She said this is due to a significant surge in violent crime, drug trafficking, and public safety threats that local authorities say have overwhelmed their resources. This is after Grisham has deployed 60 to 70 New Mexico National Guard troops to the capital, Albuquerque, to help police deal with their own surge in violent crime. And this happened in June. I think that this declaration of an emergency or state of emergency in other parts of the state is a precursor to deploying more New Mexico National Guard troops to address not just a surge in violent crime, but also a major police shortage in the state. So this data is from a local news outlet called the Hobbs News Sun, and they looked at the Southeast New Mexico police departments and found that almost all of them have a significant vacancy of credentialed law enforcement personnel in their police agencies, and 2 of them have over 30% vacancy rate. I think this is important more broadly too, because if the Trump administration's DC deployments and these New Mexico National Guard deployments actually succeed in fighting a surge in violent crime and public safety threats, I think more states are going to look to their own National Guard forces to provide support, because there are more states that are seeing a police recruitment crisis. Mm-hmm. And I think this would also bolster the Trump administration's efforts that they've been talking about for at least a month now of deploying National Guard forces into other high crime states and cities, specifically using Title 32 federal funding, which is where the National Guard remains under state control but receives federal money, sort of like a semi-active duty status, or even state and local governments that they could use their reliance on what are called state rotating funds as leverage to get them to cooperate with deploying National Guard to these other cities.
Mm. All right, Robert, two thoughts here. Number one, if it's true that a lot of these Democrat-run cities or states are undercounting crime, cooking the books, if you do deploy the National Guard and you do actually start cutting into crime, your numbers effectively won't change. And so it's possible, I guess one is it possible for these states to say, oh, look, we've had 6 months or 12 months of National Guard deployments supporting law enforcement, and it has not impacted crime whatsoever because the numbers are wrong. I guess that's the first thing. It's more rhetorical. The second thing here is deploying National Guard in support of law enforcement is one thing, but I know there's this problem in Texas. There's this problem in New Mexico, in Arizona. I'm sure other places. Cartels own certain portions of law enforcement in these counties, especially around the border area. The deployment of the National Guard does not solve that problem. And so I think that's the real one of the other problems that needs to be solved. Basically, some counterintelligence function, or I guess it would not be counterintelligence, probably counter-corruption, to root out cartel influence in these police departments. And I've not seen any plans to address that. I would love to see the Trump administration actually try to tackle that problem, because it does need to be tackled.
No, I agree. I haven't seen anything specific. I think this is more applying to non-border related crime issues. There is I think the issue with blue cities that are undercounting crime, that I think there's a political obstacle to them basically allowing National Guard forces to deploy with the idea of declaring that it had no effect, because they, in any area where they're going to say that there's low crime, I think they're going to oppose that. Like Chicago, for example, I think the leverage there for the Trump administration is the reliance on those state rotating funds, because they reported a couple of months ago that once the Trump administration started talking about cutting these state rotating funds, almost all of the states had basically a major freak out over that, because they have become very reliant on those federal funds for just basic services. And I think in Chicago example, that I think we said that that local alderman said that something like 22% of the city's budget comes from that federal money. So I think that's the leverage point for Trump on wherever he decides to surge National Guard deployments, specifically for things like supporting ICE deployments. But in this case, I think that any local government that is going to be opposed to any National Guard deployment isn't going to. I think it's a political obstacle for them to even allow it, just to say that it didn't work. In this case, in New Mexico, the Democratic governor and Democratic governments are effectively admitting that there is a crime wave or a crime surge, and they're deploying this. They're doing this on their own to try to support their own law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I wonder if that's going to come up in the midterms messaging. All right, thanks for that, Robert. And let's go ahead and move on and talk about these carrier killer missiles. Jared, take it away.
Won't have to talk about them a whole lot. So the Navy awarded Lockheed Martin $48.1 million yesterday to establish a new long-range anti-ship missile, LRASM C3 variant for the Navy specifically. Now, this is to be completed by November of 2026. The LRASM is an AI-enabled anti-ship missile with an undisclosed range, but one that was previously requested by the Navy to exceed 1,000 miles. Lockheed Martin, so basically the Navy-specific variant we can expect is probably going to be about that 1,000-mile mark. Lockheed Martin previously proved that the LRASM can be technically compatible. I mean that as in like it matches the technology. It can be technically compatible with extant Navy systems way back in 2016. So it can fly off the F-18s, the F-35s, and even out of the Mark 41 VLS, that the vertical launching system that the Navy uses. Now, the Chinese, in comparison, the Chinese DF-21 anti-ship ballistic missile has a publicly estimated range of 900 miles, and they claim that the DF-26 Bravo can reach 3,100 miles. That's the Chinese claim. Now, what this LRASM would allow the Navy to do is provide anti-ship missile coverage from ships to the entire Taiwan area of operations while staying outside the range of the primary carrier killer missiles, the DF-21, which you can see it. Unfortunately, due to the sheer size of the other one, I have to zoom out a bit on this map, but you can see that there's a carrier strike group here with projected capability mapped out. And
so they're roughly right. They're roughly, this U.S. carrier would be roughly right in between Guam and Taiwan.
Yeah. And the Chinese would not technically be able to touch them with the DF-21. Now, all other variants of this missile have actually achieved initial operational capability. There's not a lot of these missiles. They're very low production because they're extremely high tech, but they're a force multiplier. They're not the primary missile that you're going to use. Point is that you get standoff range. Because of that, the Navy specific variant is likely to retain compatibility with the F-35C and the F-A-18, both of which the U.S. Navy runs. And I will note that a fair portion of our allies run as well. Now, combining the combat range of the aircraft and missile offer even more radically improved standoff ranges. You can see that in the outer circle from the blue strike group here. It's about 1,700 miles. Now, so what this does
Jared,
is
the bottom. So the bottom line here is that we have improved standoff range, and we can reach out and touch the Chinese with these anti-ship missiles, and they cannot. They can't unless they come out closer, which would just put them in a far less defensible position. Okay.
Yeah. Now, of note, the Navy is prepared to operate inside of the range of the longer range DF-26. This suggests that the threat falls within the acceptable range for the service. Basically, hey, we're pretty certain you're not going to be able to touch us with this. So this mitigates it. Now, what this does, yes, it allows the U.S. to provide support without being touched. Great news for that. But China now has very few options for conventional or informational warfare moves left to win. That is a concern.
Jared, let me ask you this. Let's just put that on hold. Okay, so we've got this LRASM that outranges China. How many of these things can we make, and can we get them to the Indo-Pacific? Because having a whiz-bang missile sounds great, but if we can't make them, or it takes too long, we can't make them in the volume that we need, we don't have them.
Lockheed Martin has not disclosed this. From what I can tell of the capabilities, I don't think they're going to disclose how quickly they can make them, because these things are extremely capable. You are going to want to leave that ambiguous.
Sure.
Quite frankly, it achieved IOC quite a while ago, so I'd have to imagine there's at least a couple dozen of them floating around. That's not a lot, but the point of a couple dozen is that you do actually have the capability to produce them, to put them out into theater, and they have been at least somewhat used in theater. Like, it's not a lot, but even having one out there is enough to say, hey, I can reach out and touch your carrier. I can reach out and touch your launchers. Anything that's important to you, I can take this and touch it, and you cannot touch me.
So we could, I mean, with this missile, we could strike repair facilities and the Chinese ports, correct? I mean, anything over there is within reach potentially.
This is primarily an anti-ship missile. Part of the Navy variant is that part of the reason they want that 1,000-mile range is for land attack capability as well. So yes, eventually,
technically
November
okay.
26.
Okay.
But yeah, no, the main thing here is that this will threaten basically any blockade that China could run. And I don't think there's any way for the Chinese to counter this thing. Just plain and simple. I don't know if the U.S. Navy can counter this thing. This is based off of, if it does half of what they claim it will do, that there's currently, it's an amazing missile.
Okay.
But
well, that's good news. All right. Well, thanks for that, Jared. What last point here?
With China having no apparent options left on how to take Taiwan, they're losing in the polls in Taiwan. It doesn't look like they can take Taiwan militarily. Their only course of action is to cripple the U.S. before we could actually provide support for Taiwan. That includes things like crop poisoning, introducing diseases to livestock, degrading critical infrastructure.
So using it, the key assumption, Jared, has always been that China will act early to keep us tied up here domestically and not allow us time or the freedom to mobilize, deploy, and get over to the theater. Because if they can prevent us from getting over to the theater, then we're simply not there in the numbers that we need to be. So yeah. I agree that there's a huge range of things that China can do to do that. But it seems like this supports that base case, and really nothing's changed a whole lot.
Well, it pigeonholes them, because now what other option do they have to even engage in war?
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. All right, and then let's move on. There are some questions here, and I do want to also get to a comment. I've seen this, particularly on YouTube. We've got a bootlicking problem, this country says, PAN, and we're getting the tyrannical government we deserve. I want to address this. I agree, and I see a lot of chats in the points in the comment section as well. Yes, it is concerning to look at Palantir creating this national database and to look at how law enforcement is being used in effectively non-traditional ways, or how National Guard is being used in non-traditional ways, like support for law enforcement to combat crime. What is the alternative? Really, what is the alternative? We continue to allow gangs and organized crime and petty thieves and petty criminals. We continue to allow them to rape and murder their way across these cities while the local law enforcement does absolutely nothing. I don't know. It seems like neither solution is preferable, but it seems like maybe one solution is more preferable than the other. You can turn off federal law enforcement. They can leave an area. You can't turn off, there's no switch to turn off crime. And so if there is a bootlicking problem in this country, it is because the pendulum has swung too far the other way, too far towards a narco-tyranny where criminals are just given carte blanche access to prey on people. And the citizens suffer from this predation. And, what is to be done? What do you want? You're either okay with it or you're not okay with it. So I would just, to reiterate this in a different turn of phrase, if there's a bootlicking problem in this country, it is because previous administrations and current governments, elected governments, have failed to protect the people, to do really what's necessary. With that, Jared, do we have any questions here?
Yes. So coming from Bad Wabbit behind the paywall, considering India's move away from the U.S., how will that position us in the region? I think it will somewhat make us less tenable. We need the threat axis there. Just plain and simple, it ties up Chinese troops. That said, I do think there is enough of a defense architecture built up among the actual coalition over in the region to mitigate that loss.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things too that I think, Jared, you've mentioned is having access to those East Coast ports in India for potential maintenance, repair, resupply. If we're running sustained combat operations in the Indo-Pacific, it kind of seems like we'd like to have access to those.
Yep. Like I said, it's not ideal. We do lose here, but it's not a crippling loss where previously, before a lot of the stuff that we've covered here came online or came to light, I would have said India was the kingmaker in this whole arrangement. Is like they really have to be involved, and their choice decides the conflict. Now I don't see them that way.
Mm-hmm. All right. Fair enough. We'll see. We'll see what the deal maker in chief cooks up with India here. All right. So we do have several other questions here. Do you see leftist movements as paramilitary action, such as Delta Force training, Antifa members, et cetera? Okay. I'm completely unaware of any former CAG dudes training Antifa. I know of one or two. There was a Ranger and there's a former Green Beanie Special Forces guy who have trained Antifa in the past. I know they have. Could there be more? I'm sure potentially there could. But yes, I do think there is a paramilitary faction of the revolutionary left. They're the armed people. You just look at those capabilities. You know, back in 2016, when I started tracking these groups, including the armed leftist groups, they would take pictures of their range days and post them online. And it was like, you know, it's an old bolt action rifle, it's grandpa's shotgun, and maybe some weird pistol. And a few years later, now you start to see AR-15s being in use. And you look at the setup of these rifles, and they have appropriate optics, and it looks like there's appropriate furniture on it. And then you start looking at their kit, and, you know, it was like, the $30 Amazon chest rig. And then all of a sudden, now you see battle belts, and you see the chest rigs that are professional. And then you look at the setup of these belts, and pretty much everything is where it should be. So I don't know if these people learn this on YouTube or some gun blogs. I'm sure, you know, a lot of these people are probably on the similar gun blog as right wingers. But it's just funny to see this progression. And then you started seeing night vision and other optical devices. So I would say that progression is indicative of effectively a paramilitary faction. They're not active. I mean, you just look at so let me just back up here. Benjamin Song was that former Marine reservist, and he was a member of the John Brown Gun Club up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Yesterday or the day before that, he did an interview with the Washington Post. I was just reading it this morning, and it was kind of this, you know, they didn't really give him the freedom fighter treatment, but it was definitely sympathetic towards him. But that would be probably about as close to paramilitary as the left is going to come, these armed leftist groups. So in short, yes, I do see, I don't think we've gotten to paramilitary style action. That would be a much later phase. Remember, we're still in phase one for the most part, for the mainstream, the establishment left, and then the revolutionary left. They're effectively stuck in phase one. I don't see them moving to phase two, which would be on the insurrectionist side or the insurgent side. That would be guerrilla action, overt activities, which are easily seen, as opposed to organizing, which can be done clandestinely and a little more difficult to identify. We're not there yet, and we probably won't be there till I'm guessing after the midterms. That's my baseline expectation now. Otherwise, decent question. All right, Robert, I want to get your take on this. Could red state mid-decade redistricting cause more internal migration? All right, you're in Florida, and I've seen a lot of folks on the right say the goal of these red states should be to pass laws that are so intolerable to the left that they get up and leave these states. Do you think that's happened in Florida? Because there is the Ron DeSantis effect there, I think.
Yeah, in small numbers, I'm sure. I think most states are roughly 60-40 or 55-45 when it comes to partisanship.
Mhm.
I don't, at least right now, see this mid-decade redistricting thing leading to more states becoming 80-20 or 90-10. I don't think we'll see like mass exodus. Part of that is because there was still a Democrat, like here in Florida, there's still a Democratic Party of Florida. They still hold districts at the state level as well. And there have been, I know in the past, even in small number, deliberate efforts to try to do like the Freedom Project that had up in the Northeast and New Hampshire and stuff like that, the Free State Project. There have been attempts to do that for a left wing organizing in the past here, with people deliberately moving here to try to flip some state level like local governments and state level House seats and Senate seats over to the Democratic Party. I don't think we're going to see a mass exodus. I think we might actually see much more cutthroat political warfare at the state level.
Yeah, if you're only 5, 10, 15 points separating a majority, that's potentially within striking distance. Just look at a mass exodus. Look at what it takes to sell not only do you have to sell your house, you got to go to another state and buy a house. And if you're moving from a red state to a blue state, you are either going to take a hit to your standard of living, because real estate in blue states tends to be higher than in red states. And it's a lot of headache to move states in mass. Like you say, in small numbers, yeah, sure. But I agree with you. Internal migration due to red state mid-decade redistricting. Doubt it. What's the thing? Press whatever to doubt. All right. Command 11 out of Pakistan and American Kinetics and Sarah Adams is warning that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are planning terrorist attacks to set an alarm to Mumbai, like a Mumbai-style swarm attack. Are you guys picking up anything? Yeah, man, we covered that a long time ago. Basically, I have no reason to doubt Sarah Adams. The Command 11 guy, I don't know. He's cried wolf a couple of times, and I don't even pay attention to him anymore. American Kinetics, several years ago, copied and pasted stuff from our report and put it into there, so I don't even pay attention to them either. I would take Sarah Adams' warning seriously. I don't know how credible it is, but everyone you should be practicing increased vigilance anyway. There was that thing. What was it? Was it back in February or March? Maybe April. Yeah, there was this thing. Oh, the hospitals. They're going to go 3 weeks. There's going to be a major terror attack in 3 weeks. And everyone needs to freak out and post about it on social media. And you need to, okay. And then nothing happened. So I treated that seriously. I shared that for early warning folks, just as like, hey, a heads up. This guy, unknown credibility, but I would feel like an idiot if I didn't pass this along. And then, absolutely nothing happened. So, which is not to say that nothing will happen next time, but I don't treat this stuff as, I have no reason to believe that what they say is credible in general, but I treat it seriously, but unknown credibility. We'll say that. Robert, you have any points you want to make?
Well, I think some of the data points that they've talked about, I mean, we even covered last year the idea that like cartels or like cells within the United States are looking for man-pads, man-portable anti-air defense systems. True, there was that DOJ indictment that was unsealed late last month of that arms dealer related to the Russian arms dealer that we traded for a WNBA player that was trying to sell man-pads to cartels in the United States and on the border. So some of the specific information that's put out about like they're seeking out certain capabilities seems to be very credible, but I haven't seen anything else on like a specific attack or wave of attacks inside the United States.
Okay, great. All right, Jared, do we have any questions from Forward Observer members before we get too far here?
Yes. So, Bad Wabbit, what's the status on securing our food chain? There's so much news about China being here, and we've seen their attempts. Basically, any update? No.
I don't think any update. Just they're trying to catch as much stuff coming into the country as possible. I think that's the big thing.
Okay. All right. From Frozen Nomad, given the discussion explaining how active how active 3% being a major threshold to the downfall of leadership, how does the quality of that actively resisting population factor into that? He has a follow-up question as well.
Is that the 3.5% rule? Yeah, I don't know. Erica Chenoweth and some of these nonviolent action strategists crunched the numbers, and they said anytime you get 3.5% of a country actively involved in strategic non-cooperation, nonviolent action, which is inherently its resistance inherently revolutionary. They say that no regime survives that 3.5%. That's what they got to get to. Jared, what's the second half of that question? Or what in your own words? What is the straight line question here?
How does the participation of unemployed people compare with ranks of meaningful employed? Basically, that's a confounding factor. How does that happen? Or how does that play into it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've said multiple times, 2020 wouldn't have happened if you didn't have such high unemployment and the lockdowns and people not going to work, people not going to school. So I think for them to get to that 3.5%, there probably would have to be a recession. 3.5% is 12 million people in this country. They've turned out, I think, solidly 3 million people. So to put that in context, they're 25% of the way there. So we'll see. Probably not before the midterms.
All right. Bad Wabbit, actually, a different user had a follow-up question to this regarding underemployed people, since they are, if some of them are paid to protest, would they stay on to participate in violence as well, or would they just remove themselves?
I don't know. Sorry, Jared. What's the first half of that question one more time?
What about those underemployed that are being paid to protest? That company that supplies the protesters going gangbusters.
Gotcha, yeah. I don't know. I mean, if people are being paid to protest, then they'll probably continue to turn out. But a protest is not a direct action. It's not an intervention, and it's not civil disobedience. I would imagine the people being paid are going to show up and carry a sign. They're not going to show up and chain themselves to a fence or go park, set up shop and go do the sit-in or occupation of a federal building like we've seen in the past. So would be my expectation. They're there to get paid their $200 or $500. By the way, we had a guy, credible. He said he was offered $500 to go out to one of these protests. That's what he said. I have no reason to doubt him.
That's the end from behind the paywall.
All right. We'll do one more question here. Will the upcoming UK trouble/civil war spill over into the United States? Yeah, we're talking about low-intensity conflict at a minimum. And yes, I think it's likely to spread. I think once you break that precedent, once you have one Western European country, whether it's the UK or Ireland or any of the others, France, Germany, whoever, once you have that problem manifest and you actually get into, say, open activities of low-intensity conflict, then yes, I do think that spreads. Listen, my baseline expectation is we will probably not see anything crazy pop off until we have a financial crisis or a debt crisis or a recession, and then things will probably get a little Western. So if you expect a financial economic downturn by the 2028 general election, then I would probably you look at the average recession that lasts, 10, 11 months, something like that. So if it happens in pretty much any time after January 2028, it's probably going into the election season or going into the elections, just historically looking at the numbers. So listen, that's another reason why I think 2028 is going to be such a tumultuous year. Put it on your calendar. You should be preparing for it. By the way, speaking of preparing for it, one thing we do here is we keep tabs on the national and domestic picture and then the geopolitical, geostrategic picture and describe what's going on, provide you our expectations. One thing we cannot do is describe what's going on for you at the local level. That is up to you. And that is one thing that we do at Special Projects. This is the new way to join Forward Observer. We have our early warning, which is our intelligence membership, forwardobserver.com if you'd like to check it out. Special Projects, that is now up and running on the Forward Observer website. And it is, I'll tell you a lot more about it, but generally, there's training, There's video training in there. And what I'm trying to do is train up sensors, train up people who can take the lead on the intelligence side. Whether you're dealing with natural disasters or man-made disasters, it does not matter. Whatever emergency or crisis is happening in your state, in your county, in your city, you've got to have situational awareness. And the only thing, there's no amounts of beans, bullets, or Band-Aids that can provide you with situational awareness on what your local security picture looks like. Only intelligence can do that. In order to do that, you need the training. That's what we do at Special Projects. I'll share a lot more with you coming up in the next couple of weeks. But it is now open. So forwardobserver.com if you'd like to join. And I have the area intelligence workshop. So if you need to get your area study done, jump over there, go through the area intelligence workshop. It's a video series that's step-by-step. I'll show you how to build your area study. Forwardobserver.com, then click on join, then click on special projects. So with that, everyone, thanks so much for your support. Thanks for watching. We will be back in your inbox tomorrow morning, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.